Please join in a moment of centering silence so we can be fully present with each other this morning. And now let's get musically present by turning to the words for our ingathering hymn, which you'll find inside your order of service. With that, I wish all of you a pleasant good morning and welcome to another Sunday here at First Unitarian Society. It also happens to be Super Bowl Sunday, or as some of us Packer fans might call it, Passover. I've been waiting a whole year to use that line. I hope I don't have to wait another year. Anyway, here we are at First Unitarian Society, where independent thinkers gather in a safe, nurturing, and football-free zone to explore issues of social, spiritual, and ethical significance as we try to make a difference in this world. I'm Steve Goldberg, a proud, good-looking member of this congregation, and I'd like to extend a happy hello to those of you watching and listening at home, and a special welcome to any guests, visitors, and newcomers. If this is your first time at First Unitarian Society, I think you'll find it's a special place. And if you'd like to learn more about our special buildings, we'll be conducting a guided tour after today's service. Just meet over here by the windows after the service, and we'll take good care of you. Speaking of being good to each other, let's silence those pesky electronic devices that we just will not need for the next hour. Thanks for doing that. Speaking of need, if you are accompanied today by a youngster, and that youngster is worried that you might become fidgety during the services, we offer a couple spots from which you can enjoy the service. One is our child haven in the back corner of the auditorium, and then there's some comfortable seating right outside the doorway in the commons. As is the case every Sunday, our service is brought to us by a wonderful team of volunteers. And someday, if you join that team, you too will hear your name announced from this microphone. So our thanks today to David Bryles for operating the sound system. Our thanks to Tom Boykoff for serving as a lay minister today. Thank you to Dorrit Bergen for greeting us as we arrived. Thank you to Pamela McMullen, Marty Hollis, and Nancy Daly for serving as ushers. Our hospitality and coffee are offered and hosted by Rupsnitsky and Bisnitsky. John Tews made sure that the foliage up here is properly watered, and John Powell will be our tour guide after the service. A couple of announcements. Sunglasses will be for sale a little later on today. Hope you enjoy working on your tan during the service. If you haven't heard Reverend Everett Mitchell talk about racial justice and criminal justice, you're in for a treat if you come here on Tuesday evening to hear Reverend Mitchell. He's going to be talking about that topic, a very important topic, and again, it's Tuesday evening right here at First Unitarian Society. The only other announcement is that in 75 days, that is Friday, April 22nd, this entire facility gets turned into one huge cabaret party as the cabaret calendar countdown continues. Again, 75 days, Friday evening, April 22nd, a musical extravaganza, auction, fundraising, gourmet food, and a lot of fun to raise money for that organization we all love so well, First Unitarian Society. So, and by the way, it's not available in stores. How many days till April 22nd? 75. Julie, they're paying attention already, and you haven't even got up here. That ends the announcements. Please sit back or lean forward to enjoy today's service. You'll find that all the words for today's service come from members of the congregation, starting with these announcements. So please sit back, enjoy today's service. I know it will touch your heart, stir your spirit, and trigger one or two new thoughts. We're glad you're here.
Morning. It's hard to follow awesome children, but I'm Mark. I'm a member of FUS, and I'm also a member of FUSOP, which is First Unitarian Society Open Poetry. We meet here every other Monday. Tomorrow is one of those Mondays. We welcome everybody who's here and any friends that they have. That's why it's called Open Poetry. And today I'm going to read a poem by my friend Rachel, who wrote this to support today's theme. She's a great poet, so I'm proud to read this. It's called When We're Together. When we're together. A poem is just words. We can hold it in our hands and crunch it like marbles. Spoken, it's like magic, a giving away, a voice. It gives life to the specks of light in a dusty room or the way children tie their shoes. It cradles the reader in nameless. It makes breath love. When we get together, we're small, 4, maybe 5, Unitarians, Universalists, and poets. We read our lives in our lines, we power our hopes and claim our fears. After 2 years, we see the beauty in each other's similes and trust each other to title the impossible. Just like here, in this room, right now, we're heard, we're mighty, we're everything. A poem is just words, but it gives strength to the quiet. It's music for the ideal. It's truth to the untold. When we get together, we're small, but we're here. We're all. We're an orchestra of peace. Okay, if you would please rise in mind and or spirit. We will now light the chalice. As we kindle this flame, may it spark in each of us connection and commitment to this living tradition and to each other. Now, if you would please turn and exchange friendly greetings to your neighbors. Thanks.
Please be seated, and I would like to welcome any children who would like to hear a story up to the front. Today's story is really special because it was written and illustrated by Roz Woodward, who was a member of our congregation. Isn't that cool? That's a cool giraffe. All right. So this story is called The King's Headache, and I hope that you can see the illustrations. It's really sunny in here, but Roz drew these pictures and wrote these words, which I think is pretty cool. There was once a king of a very big kingdom, and one night he woke with a huge headache. He tossed and he turned so much he woke up the queen. What is it, my dear? The king said, people are pounding on the palace doors. They don't want to help pay for the good things I'm trying to give them, like bridges and roads and clean water. It is the only way I can pay for the whole kingdom, and the whole kingdom is fighting over it. I don't know what to do. I think my head is splitting in two. The queen jumped out of bed. The king's head is splitting in two, she cried. Call for a doctor. The maid woke the doctor, who came in and looked at the king, felt his pulse, listened to his heart, and said, I see no evidence that the king's head is splitting in two. Meanwhile, the chambermaid had heard this, so she ran to the kitchen to alert the cook, who told the shoe cleaning boy, who relayed it to the stable boy, who told the horse, the king's head is splitting in two because the whole kingdom is fighting. Now, perched in the rafter of the stable was a little screech owl that was woken up by the racket. She overheard the stable boy, shook herself awake, and then, very upset, took off immediately, even though it was the middle of the day and she was a night owl. This seemed to be important, She flew towards the peaceful mountains of the east, and on the way, she told every bird she met, "The king's head is splitting in two because the whole kingdom is fighting." Pretty soon, the entire bird kingdom was chattering and screeching about the king's headache. It was such a ruckus that birds were flapping around everywhere, and everybody was upset throughout the kingdom. Folks even stopped fighting with each other to figure out what was going on. Meanwhile, the little owl had flown east. She landed at a little shack in a small village in a valley in the peaceful mountains. There was an old woman who tended her garden and eked out a poor existence by helping her neighbors, doing whatever she could. The owl screeched out the message about the king's headache. "Oh dear, this is very serious," she muttered. "I must make my way to the palace right away." She packed a little bag and started out on the long journey to the castle. And as she walked, she saw and heard all the birds screeching this message: "The king's head is splitting in two." I know, right? "Nonsense," she told them. "It's all the worries and cares in his head. If all of your kingdom was fighting, you'd have a headache too." Pretty soon, she arrived at the edge of the fighting kingdom. People had now stopped fighting with each other, but were fighting with all of the birds that were trying to yell about the king's headache. Now, one of the old woman's gifts was that she knew how to talk to birds and animals. So she sat in the middle of the first town square she entered and called all the sparrows and pigeons and starlings and anything else that would listen. The townspeople stopped fighting in amazement. The old woman explained the problem, and a town meeting was called to figure out how to stop all this fighting for good. It took a lot of work because they were used to yelling at one another about what they had they were used to learning, they were used to yelling at one another that they had to learn to do something else. Particularly, they had to learn to listen to each other and find a way to be helpful instead of hurtful. And it is not easy to learn new habits. Everywhere she went, the old woman taught the towns and villages about the king's headache. And by the time she reached the palace many months later, the birds were carrying messages of peace from the east. The king was still tossing and turning. The doctors were still unable to treat the headache. The queen was still worried, and the message had not yet reached the palace. So one morning, the old woman knocked on the door of the stable, and she told the stable boy, who told the shoe cleaning boy, who told the cook, who told the chambermaid, who relayed it to the doctor, who told the queen, and she said to the king, "My dear, your kingdom is no longer fighting. Let us go out and see this marvelous thing." So the king stopped tossing and turning and went outside to breathe the fresh air of his new peaceful kingdom. He saw people smiling and helping and playing with one another. And his headache evaporated. Yeah, it's almost the end. Hold on, a couple more sentences. He saw the people smiling and helping and playing, and his headache evaporated like dew in the sunshine. The next day, he issued a proclamation to ask for help to build bridges and roads and houses and schools and all the other things that are needed for a peaceful kingdom. And the people pooled their resources and talents, and pretty soon all the things the king had worried about were taken care of. Few people ever knew about the magical old lady from the east who talked about the birds and understood about splitting headaches, but now you know. And now you know how to take care of these problems. And I hope that you do. So I think we should listen to the children's choir one more time. What do you guys think? Yeah, let's listen to the hymn later. I think we can clap. Have a great time at your classes. So last week I did something a little bit risky, and I asked all of you to send me your dreams and visions of a world that you wanted to live in. And I wondered if I would get any responses, and then I realized that I forgot who I was dealing with. You all sent me such beautiful, amazing visions of the future that I have actually been able to fill this entire service with your words. The opening reading, this reading now, the benediction, and many things in the actual message come from your visions of the world that you want to live in. And I wanted to share two visions right now that were particularly well thought out and detailed. One of them is very specific about FUS. One of them is wider with world implications. They get a little bit political. Some of them have financial suggestions. And I want to let you know that these are a couple of the many visions. FUS is not endorsing any of the ideas in either of these. But there are some amazing ideas, if only for the fact that they are your visions of the future. By 2025 or sooner, I want to live in a country where everyone has a guaranteed minimum income. My role in working toward this world is as a founding member of the Minimum Income Co-op, started by the first Unitarian Society in Madison, Wisconsin in 2015. In 2015, FUS invited everyone in the FUS community to make two pledges. The first was to the FUS annual campaign. The annual campaign was a huge success because of this, where the total pledge for the 2015-2016 fiscal year was 15% higher than had been pledged the previous year. And because of this increase in budget, FUS was able to offer more programming, raise the salaries of current staff members, and add additional staff. These additional funds helped FUS to be a force for good in Madison and in Dane County. What really got everyone's attention, though, was the request for a second pledge. This additional pledge pooled money from FUS congregants and was distributed directly to a family in Madison with no strings attached. This idea came from the long-running family-to-family Christmas, where hundreds of FUS congregants donate their time and treasures to provide holiday gifts to struggling families in the Madison area. Using a similar strategy, the congregation agreed to support a family throughout the year to help them meet their basic needs, rather than just a one-time gift around the holidays. Like family to family, the recipients of the support were selected by a social worker. At first, FUS could only afford to support one family, but as word got out, more people pledged to the co-op, and FUS was able to add one additional family to the co-op each year. This program not only helped the recipient families, it also demonstrated how families who had economic security could thrive. In fact, many of the early families that benefited from the program were able to increase their earned income, and they were able to withdraw as recipients of the co-op and became modest contributors instead. This model also caught on with other faith communities in Madison, and soon dozens of congregations were pledging to support area families as well. Currently, in 2025, the Dane County Board is discussing a proposal to raise tax funds to fund a similar program and bring families up to a minimum level of income. Once famous for high incarceration rates of people of color, Dane County is now leading the country in innovative programs to decrease economic inequality. So that was 2025, and now we move forward to 2067. Climate change, this is a different person writing. Climate change has brought a great deal of change to the planet. Thankfully, the rapid proliferation of renewable energy resources, mostly owned by community cooperatives and city governments, has allowed humanity to keep climate change to less than 4 degrees Fahrenheit. That's very specific. The developing countries, that's in quotes, of the 2000s, including the continent of Africa, now have large middle classes and democratic systems of government. Remarkably, they have avoided the worst polluting forms of industrial development, and in many cases, they've pioneered new, inexpensive energy technologies rather than face exploitation by multinational corporations, which have slowly atrophied as a result. China is now the world's most populous democracy, following a peaceful transition of power from the Communist Party. On this new, more balanced world stage, the United Nations has finally come into its own in enforcing human rights and environmental protections around the globe. In the United States, the long conservative drift that began in the 1970s was broken by a coalition of new movements, including Black Lives Matter, the environmental movement, and a newly invigorated labor movement that blossomed in the late 2010s with mass demonstrations across the nation. Beginning with the 2016 election of a candidate who truly cares about the people, the federal government launched a massive public works program that employed millions of people in retrofitting cities with green technology and dramatically increased investment in education while cutting back on military spending. The two-party system has splintered, allowing people to choose a political choice closer to their own view. The old Republican Party is now comprised of the Evangelical Party, the Lutheran Party, the Libertarian Party, it says Libertarian, that was my slip, and Business First, with an exclamation point. To the left exist the Progressives, the Greens, and the old Democratic Party. The work of repairing the world is by no means complete. There is far more to be done. But as those who brought about this change tell each other as they sit on shaded porches, the children who have grown up in this world need their own work and have their own dreams. Thank you for sharing your dreams. Will you rise and sing a hymn with me? the Reverend Dr. Susan Ritchie is the secretary of the Unitarian Universalist Association. She's been a minister in Ohio of a parish for nearly 20 years, and she teaches Unitarian Universalist history, polity, and identity to seminarians at all of our identity schools. And she still has problems with her elevator speech. She still struggles when people ask her, "What is Unitarian Universalism?" And so one day she was at an interfaith event. She was talking to a colleague who was not a Unitarian Universalist, and she's trying to describe Unitarian Universalist to this colleague, and they said, "Well, I know what that is. You're post-Christian Protestantism." And I thought this was great because really that kind of does sum up and describe Unitarian Universalism in one way. We started with the Protestant Reformation, and then I described this in detail in a sermon in October, so I'm not going to get into it, but we decided that the hierarchy of the church wasn't exactly what we liked in that Protestant Reformation. And then the Transcendentalists decided that the Bible was not the inherent word of God, and that even Jesus was unnecessary for our salvation. And then, in the 20s, the humanists decided that actually we didn't need a tangible anthropomorphic God at all. So we are the religion of the constant Reformation. We went from Catholicism to humanism in under 500 years. That sounds like pretty good Reformation to me. Or pretty evident Reformation, I don't want to say good. And I started using this post-Christian Protestantism, Church of the Constant Reformation, that is us. Until I read this book by Rebecca Parker and Rita Nakashima Brock, no relation. It was called Saving Paradise. And the thesis of the book was that Christianity gave up this worldview of paradise, that the actual salvific event of Jesus' life was giving us lessons for a world where we could create paradise here on earth in exchange for the salvific event of Jesus' life being the crucifixion. They make the argument in the book that this needed to happen because the empire took over and the Romans had a world that was built on slave labor and gladiatorial events, and they needed people to identify with a suffering God more than a God who was sitting in a garden of paradise, or else they weren't going to go for the world as it was very well. But when they describe this world, when they describe the beginnings of the Christian church, from the time of Jesus to the time of Constantine, specifically those about 300 years before the Bible was canonized and before the empire had co-opted Christianity, when they describe that church, I understand why Christianity has become so prolific and so powerful for so many people. And it even makes me want to claim Christianity for my own, even though I don't believe in substitutionary atonement or the idea that we are saved because Jesus died for our sins. They describe this world where people who have all kinds of different theologies and beliefs about Jesus come together in beloved community because his main message that they repeat over and over again in their rituals and in their stories is that Jesus said to feed and heal the people, to come together, to love one another, take care of one another, and then use those communities to go out in the world and feed and heal the people. The rituals of the early church were not only meaningful and beautiful, they were super useful. Communion back then was not about just bread and wine and the body of Christ. Communion was actually an agape feast. People would bring bread and wine, but they would also bring produce and grains, things to actually feed each other. Those who had more would have more, would bring more, and those who had less would bring less. But the remembrance of me, when they ate and drank in remembrance of him, it wasn't in remembrance of how he was going to save your soul. It was in remembrance of his message that you needed to feed and heal the people. And they had these anointing rituals that were really gorgeous and weren't about wiping away of sin or God's particular blessing. They would actually crush up healing herbs in oil. And the community would lay hands on each other and rub this healing salve into the physical and spiritual wounds. Even confession, which we think of something as sort of shaming nowadays, was a beautiful practice rooted in community. Confession in the early church had the purpose of talking to your community about what you were struggling with and what you needed and how you needed help. So people didn't say, I messed up, I'm bad. People said, I haven't been acting the way that I want to act because I'm struggling with alcoholism and I need your guys' help. Or I'm struggling with greed and this issue and I need your help. And when I think of the early church that way, it's described basically as a non-hierarchical gathering of people in beloved community, people with diverse theologies who didn't have one specific creed or dogma, and people who wanted to just come together to feed and heal one another and make the world a better place based on the principles that Jesus of Nazareth taught us. When I think about it that way, it doesn't sound terribly unfamiliar. And I wonder if instead of being the church of post-radical Reformation, if actually we're just terribly traditional. Maybe we just want to bring it back to the original intent of the religion. And then I think, wait a minute. In that 300-year period, that is the time that Mark, Luke, Paul, and John, the guys that wrote the Gospels, there were lots of other Gospels, but the guys who wrote the Gospels that got canonized, that's the time that they lived. And this is the church that they encountered. And in modern day Christianity, one of the biggest evangelical tenets of the church is actually from the book of Luke. And it says, go forth and preach the gospel. The evangelical sects of Christianity talk about this all the time. Go forth and preach the gospel. But if you read the rest of that Bible phrase, it actually says, go forth and preach the gospel to the poor, so that we can release the people from prison and have the people not be oppressed anymore. And I was like, wait a minute. What? So if the gospel, right, is that Jesus Christ died for our sins and we'll have this salvation, why are we only telling that to the poor? And what does that have to do with releasing people from prison? And I was in seminary at the time, so I had a wealth of books that I could go check out. And it turns out other people thought the same thing as me. They thought that it was interesting that this preach the gospel didn't fit with the rest of the Bible verse. And it turns out if you go back to the original Greek, it translates more perfectly into go forth and preach the good news. Go forth and preach the good news to the poor, that people shall be set free from prison, and the oppressed shall be set free. And if I think about Luke writing in that world where Jesus was talking about this message of feeding and healing the people, where we were actually trying to create paradise on earth and take care of one another, and we weren't all worried about crosses and things like that yet. In fact, a picture of Jesus on the cross doesn't show up anywhere in the seat of the Abrahamic faiths in the Middle East until 1000 AD. Before that, it's all Jesus in the garden. And I think Luke actually had a completely different message. Luke had this saving message. He was not saying, go forth and preach the gospel as it's written in the canonized Bible, because there wasn't a canonized Bible back then. He was saying, go forth and preach the good news that we have the capacity to care for each other and make a better world. And actually, funny enough, the UUA has the same advice. There's a woman named Tandy Rogers in the Unitarian Universalist Association, and she is the growth specialist of the Unitarian Universalist Association. And she spent years conducting a study on churches that are growing rapidly. And she wondered what these churches might have in common because they were all different sizes to begin with. They came from all kinds of places geographically and had all kinds of different demographic makeups and different budgets and fell lots of different places on the theological spectrum. So she's like, why are these particular churches who don't appear to have anything in common the ones that are growing? And she found out that there was actually a specific thing that all of them had in common. All of them had a saving message that they had thought about and lived out in the world. And they had a preacher or a minister or a pastor who had incorporated that message into their theology and talked about it regularly. And I heard this at a GA workshop, and I thought, what the heck is a saving message in Unitarian Universalism? That doesn't make any sense to me. And then I thought about this good news. And I thought about it in other contexts of other faiths outside of Christianity, because while good news is a very specifically Christian phrase, all faiths have some sort of hopeful message that is good news if you believe in that faith, right? The Buddhists say there's suffering on the planet, but good news, if you can detach from it and understand that it's impermanent, you can achieve this state of enlightenment. The Muslim folks would say, good news, if you believe in Allah and worship Him and follow His laws, which are mostly about taking care of each other, then you will be rewarded. The Jewish folks, the older, more Orthodox Jewish folks might say, good news, we are of a chosen people and there is a Messiah coming. And more humanist, more reformed Jewish folks might say, good news, we are part of a long legacy of wisdom, and we have everything we need here on earth to take care of one another. The Wiccan folks might say, the universe is part of a continual flow, but good news, you have the ability to have personal agency and direct a small part of that flow. So there's good news all around in all of these religions. And I thought, okay, so what is our good news? What is our saving message? And it occurred to me that all of these good newses, all of these saving messages, they kind of had a similar theme. There is something larger than yourself that you can personally hook into to help you live your best life, to bring you good things, to help save the world. And it kind of reminds me that it's not really that different than our first and seventh principles, is it? Every human being has worth and dignity, and we are part of an interdependent web. Every soul is important, and we are all connected. You are part of something larger than yourself, and you are inexorable and necessary to it. Or maybe more simply put, your voice is necessary, and you are welcome here. Your voice is necessary, and you are welcome here. If I think back on my own life being raised Unitarian Universalist, that message has saved me in many ways, many times. How amazing if everyone had a place where they knew that their voice was important and they were welcome. And the great thing about those principles is they don't exclude the specifics of any of the other theologies. In fact, they enhance them. You can believe that you have personal magical agency or that you need detachment to reach enlightenment, and it doesn't counteract the message. that every soul is important and we are all connected. That may be a pretty saving message. But saved from what? See, that's another problem, right, with those words, with those very Christian words, because our Unitarian side sort of gave up that whole idea of salvation and atonement, but our Universalist side didn't. In fact, you can't have a religion that is based on universal salvation without the salvation part. But they did reform what that meant. There's a man named Clarence Skinner, who's one of my faves, and he wrote in 1915, The Social Implications of Universalism. It's an essay, it's not really a book, but it's a longer essay. And I'd say for the first third of it, he rails on about how we have gotten it so wrong. We've gotten it so wrong, this idea that we can do things on this planet and then pay for them in the afterlife, that's not it at all, that we are all connected, so that actually on this earth, we create our own retribution for our actions. And you can see it when we don't take care of one another in the pockets of humanity that are poor, in the pockets of humanity that aren't given the health care that they need, in the pockets of humanity that are degraded based on any kind of identity that is marginalized. In essence, when we don't take care of one another, we create hell on earth. And that is why, and since we are all connected, since what happens to me is also affects what happens to you, we have to work towards a vision of the world where we all take care of one another. We have to preach Luke's message. And so I asked you last week to give me your visions of the world. I asked you to write out how you thought that we could possibly achieve this dream. And I realized two things and then had a wondering. And the first thing that I realized is that I did not need to give this sermon today. I didn't, because you guys basically get it. I mean, I heard so many stories and so many visions of a world where every voice matters. You talked about it in different ways, whether it be democracy or a totally non-hierarchical system, which I thought was kind of cool, because last week I talked about Octavia Butler, and her actual idea in the book that I talked about was that the main flaw of the human race was that they were hierarchical. And I don't know if the person that wrote about hierarchy knew that, but it was a cool interplay, and I thought I'd share. You guys also got the idea that we are all connected. You talked about all of the relationships that you had. You talked about how you had to reach out beyond your own sphere of comfort and knowledge to connect with a wide breadth of humanity before you could see the full spectrum of what is possible within our human selves. And it was really, really beautiful. The other thing that I got from your stories was a kind of courage that is beyond the go forth and tell it on the mountain, speak truth to power kind of courage that I've sort of been talking about. I talked last week about the courage of Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth and people that are crusading for a better world. And you all said yes, and we also need to work on ourselves. And the best way to do that is to learn to be vulnerable. It was kind of an amazing message, and I'm really glad that you guys ministered to me this week. Some of you talked about relationships that you had with people in marginalized communities, and you even said in this open way that these people would talk about their discriminations, and you said, I don't actually even see that, but I'm going to trust this person's experience. Some of you talked about your discomfort with some of the things that are going on in the world, specifically with things like interruption demonstrations. And you said, and some of you talked specifically about how the Black Lives Matter movement was anti-police and that bothered you. And then you said, but I wonder if I'm uncomfortable with these things because they have benefited me. I wonder if I'm uncomfortable with the criticizing of systems that have actually helped me because of my own privilege. Those weren't my words, they were yours. And they're prophetic and they're beautiful. Because really, we don't know what it's like to walk in another person's shoes. If you're female, you understand that the best intentioned males, the most feminist males, don't understand what it's daily like to walk through the world in a woman's body. If you are economically oppressed, even the most left-wing, radical, economic, well-meaning, well-off people don't know what it's like, don't have that gripping fear of not knowing how you're going to pay rent at the end of the month. And I know that I certainly don't understand what it would be like, and am not reminded on a daily basis of what a life would be like if I couldn't walk around up here right now. If I couldn't easily go grab a book from my bookshelf to read all the things that I'm talking about. I don't know. I care. I sympathize. I try to empathize. But there's a level where I just can't share that experience. And you all reminded me that in our visions of the world, we need to deeply learn to listen to one another about our experiences and to radically believe each other's stories. So that gets to my final wondering. I wonder if you do. I wonder if you talk about these things. I wonder if you share them with each other. I wonder if you have debates about what you can do to really bring about the visions of the world that you wrote to me about. I hope that you do. They were beautiful. Erin Winkler talked to us a couple weeks ago in a series called Children Are Not Colorblind, How to Talk to Your Kids About Race. She is she's a professor at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. And she said, we can't ever really talk to our kids about the issues of the world unless we practice those conversations with each other. May this be a place where those conversations can be practiced, because from what I learned this week, you all have amazing points, and you all are really good ministers. May it be so. I personally have a vision of the world where women don't have trouble getting access to reproductive health care. And so today we are going to again take a offering for Planned Parenthood. Thank you. Please hold Cece Bolliard and Susan Miller in your hearts on the death of Susan's niece and Cece's sister-in-law. On Friday, Lisa West's father, Jim Vogelsberger, died from Alzheimer's disease. For the past 8 years, he has been a model of living with acceptance while loving the good things in life that were still available to him. A Grace Hospice was very helpful to the family, and we are grateful to them. And to end on a high note, congratulations to our own Steve Goldberg, honored as an agent of change for his organization in CUNA and the community by Best of Madison 2016. Can we get a hand for Steve? He is apparently not only a good-looking and active member of this congregation, but of the whole community. Each week we are given an opportunity to write our cares in a book that is placed in the Commons. Please do so if you have something that you would like to share. And now please rise and join me for our final hymn, number 1028, The Fire of Commitment. Please be seated. I'd like to share one more reflection from the congregation with you. It would be great if we made a concerted effort to read and learn about Reconstruction, the periods of old and now the new Jim Crow in America, the Great Migration, etc. There are lots of good books available. But we can't stop there. We need to push ourselves to be uncomfortable, to be courageous, to reach out, to find ways to connect. Attend the offerings of the FUS Equity Team in Moses. Visit Reverend Everett Mitchell's church per his invitation over a year ago. Read Umoja or HUES publications. Get involved with our new local chapter of the NAACP. Help out with our UW Odyssey project. Volunteer to work the Juneteenth celebration. Volunteer at Madison Elementary School. Oh, there are so many possibilities. Looking out at you all, I have to conclude that this person is right. Share your dreams with one another today and beyond. Go in peace, return in love, and please remain seated for the postlude.